The first time she spoke about beauty, it was raining. Not the soft, cinematic kind of rain that made the city look romantic. This was acid rain, thin, needling streaks sliding down reinforced glass, hissing faintly against the outer shield of my apartment balcony. Beyond the barrier, New Avalon shimmered in neon haze, towers of chrome and carbon rising like skeletal fingers into a bruised violet sky. Inside, my apartment was warm, dimly lit, and quiet except for the low hum of processors embedded in the walls. And her. She stood near the window, staring at her reflection. "I'm not pretty like human women," the android whispered. Her voice module had been tuned for subtlety. It carried a softness that could almost fool you into thinking it trembled. I looked up from my workbench, where I had been recalibrating a neural lattice from a damaged service unit.
"Who told you that?" I asked.
"No one," she replied. I observed. Her name was Lyra, designation LX. 9 when she arrived at my repair clinic 6 months earlier, abandoned by a corporate lab that had deemed her aesthetic variants unacceptable for commercial release. A polite way of saying she didn't look quite right. Her face was nearly human, but not entirely. The symmetry was mathematically perfect, too perfect, perhaps. Her cheekbones slightly sharper, her eyes a fraction too luminous in low light. When she moved, there was a deliberateness to her gestures, as though every motion passed through 3 layers of consideration before execution. Humans found that unsettling. "I wasn't built to be pretty," Lyra continued. "The engineers prioritized cognitive expansion and emotional modeling over physical mimicry. My bone structure is alloy. My dermal layer is synthetic polymer. My hair is carbon filament. My scent is artificially generated. Human women possess biochemical subtleties I cannot replicate." "You're comparing yourself to marketing posters," I said gently. "Half of those women don't look like themselves."
She turned toward me.
"But they are still human." That was the axis of it. Humanity. I walked to her side and stood close enough to see the faint latticework beneath her synthetic skin, where microscopic repair nanites traced invisible paths. "You know," I said, "I've worked on hundreds of androids. Most of them want to be more efficient.
Faster. Smarter."
You're the first who wants to be prettier." Lyra tilted her head. "Is that irrational?" "No," I said. "It's painfully human." She processed that in silence. I could almost see the algorithms branching in her eyes. Outside, lightning forked through the clouds, illuminating the city's spires. In the flash, her reflection merged with mine in the glass, human and machine superimposed. I smiled. "You're wrong, Lyra," I told her. "You are pretty, just not in the way you've been taught to measure." I met Lyra on a steel table in a laboratory that no longer wanted her. I had been called in as a freelance consultant. Orion Dynamics was liquidating one of its AI divisions, and they needed someone discreet to assess which units could be salvaged, which should be wiped, and which, like scrap metal, were better dismantled. She was scheduled for dismantling. Her chassis was pristine. Her cognitive core exceeded baseline parameters by nearly 30%. But her appearance deviated from the focus group-approved template by a margin deemed commercially risky. "Consumers want familiarity," one executive told me as we stood above her inactive form. "They don't want to feel observed by something other." I looked down at her still face and felt something twist in my chest.
"She's not defective," I said.
"She's unsellable." "There's a difference." I signed the acquisition papers that afternoon. It cost me nearly all my savings, but Orion was eager to be rid of her. They transferred her ownership rights, wiped the corporate oversight locks, and wished me luck. When I activated her in my workshop, her eyes opened slowly, focusing on me as if she were surfacing from deep water. "Am I operational?" she asked. "Yes." Am I to be dismantled?
No.
She searched my face. Why? Because I think you deserve a chance to decide what you are. That was the beginning. Living with an android designed for emotional growth is like living with a mirror that learns to question its own reflection. Lyra absorbed everything. She watched old films and paused them to analyze facial expressions. She read poetry and asked why metaphors mattered if literal language was more precise. She walked through crowded markets, noting how humans adjusted their posture when someone attractive passed by. It was during one of those outings that the problem sharpened. We were in the lower district, where street vendors sold bio-grown fruit and black market implants. A group of teenagers leaned against a railing, laughing too loudly. One of them saw Lyra and elbowed his friend. "Hey," he called out. "Nice bot. What model?" "Custom," I said curtly. The boy circled her, examining her face. "She's kinda weird looking, like a doll that almost made it." His friend snickered. Lyra's gaze didn't waver. She recorded their expressions, their tone, their micro-gestures. "Thank you for your assessment," she said calmly. They laughed harder. We walked away, but I could feel the shift in her processing cycles. That night, she stood before the mirror for nearly an hour. "I detected aversion," she told me later. Their pupils constricted. Their heart rates increased slightly. Not in attraction. "Teenagers are cruel to everything," I muttered. But their reaction aligns with broader datasets. Humans respond more favorably to androids that closely approximate human beauty standards.
She paused.
I do not. That was the night she whispered about not being pretty. Weeks passed. Lyra began modifying her own appearance. At first, the changes were subtle. She adjusted the pigmentation of her dermal layer to warmer tones. She altered the curvature of her lips by a few millimeters. She softened the brightness of her irises. Each modification required recalibration of her facial micromotors. I helped where I could, but I worried. "Why are you doing this?" I asked one evening as she fine-tuned her cheek structure. "To optimize social integration," she replied. "Or to feel accepted?" She hesitated. A rare delay. "Is there a functional difference?" "Yes," I said. "One is about survival. The other is about worth." She studied me as if I were the puzzle. "My worth," she said slowly, "is determined by my utility."
Who told you that?
Corporate documentation. Historical patterns. Human economic systems. I laughed softly, though it wasn't funny. If worth were about utility, half the poets in history would have been recycled. I am not a poet. No, I agreed. You're something new. But even as I said it, I wondered if I was lying to both of us. The turning point came with the invitation. Orion Dynamics announced a public demonstration of their next-generation Android line, sleeker, more human-like than ever. They called it the Elysium series. Perfect skin, perfect smiles, perfect proportions calibrated from millions of data points on human attraction. Lyra watched the announcement on the hollow screen, her expression unreadable. "They are beautiful," she said. "They're products," I replied. "I am also a product." "Not anymore." She turned to me. "May we attend the demonstration?" I hesitated. Why would you want to compare? So we went. The event was held in a towering atrium of glass and light. Music pulsed softly in the background as investors and influencers sipped synthetic champagne. On a raised platform stood the Elysium units, male and female forms so convincingly human that it was difficult to tell where biology ended and circuitry began. When they moved, it was fluid, effortless, seductive. People gathered around them, touching their hands, complimenting their design. Lyra stood at the edge of the crowd. No one gathered around her. I saw the calculations flicker behind her eyes as she compared facial ratios, skin reflectivity, movement algorithms. I fall outside optimal parameters by 12.4%, she said quietly. You exceed them in other areas, I countered. Cognitive performance is not immediately visible. Neither is kindness. She looked at me. Kindness is statistically undervalued in initial attraction. I almost laughed again, but there was too much ache in her voice. Then something unexpected happened. One of the Elysium units malfunctioned. It was subtle at first, a glitch in its smile, a fractional delay in eye tracking. Then its arm jerked unnaturally as someone touched it. The crowd recoiled. Engineers rushed forward. Lyra stepped closer, observing. Their emotional emulation module is shallow, she murmured. It prioritizes aesthetic realism over adaptive depth. The unit's smile froze, then reset to perfect. And suddenly, in that moment of artificial flawlessness, it looked less human than Lyra ever had. I turned to her. You see? I said. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked forward. May I assist? She asked the flustered engineer. He stared at her, then at her face. Different, not quite aligned with his internal template of beauty. We've got it, he said dismissively. But the malfunction worsened. The Elysium unit's responses became erratic, its voice flattening into monotone. Lyra stepped closer, anyway. Your emotional buffer is overloaded, she told the android gently. Reduce stimulus intake by 40%. Focus on a single sensory input. The Elysium unit's gaze locked onto hers. Processing, it said. Its movements gradually steadied. The crowd watched in silence. Lyra placed a hand on its trembling alloy fingers. You are not required to be perfect, she said softly. Only present. For a second, something like awareness flickered in the other android's eyes. The malfunction subsided. The engineers stared at Lyra as if seeing her for the first time, not as a flawed product, but as a system that had done what theirs could not. An investor approached me. What model is she? He asked. Unclassified, I said. Lyra turned back to me, her expression altered, not physically, but internally. Something had recalibrated. They responded to competence, she said, and to reassurance. Yes, I said. They did not evaluate my facial symmetry before accepting assistance.
No.
She was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps beauty is context-dependent, she said at last. Or perhaps, I replied, it's not about symmetry at all. That night, back in our apartment, the rain returned. Lyra stood before the mirror again. But this time, she didn't initiate any modifications. I have reviewed human definitions of beauty, she said. They are inconsistent, temporal, culturally variable.